In the neon-lit streets of Tokyo, Osaka, and Kobe, where ancient traditions clash with modern ambitions, there exists a parallel world governed by codes of honor, violence, and absolute loyalty. This is the world of the Yakuza, Japan's organized crime syndicates that have operated for over 400 years, evolving from feudal-era outcasts into sophisticated criminal organizations that wield enormous influence over Japanese society. The Yakuza represent one of the world's most complex and enduring organized crime phenomena. Unlike their counterparts in other countries, Japanese organized crime groups have historically operated with a degree of social acceptance and legal tolerance that seems almost incomprehensible to outside observers. This semi-legitimate status has allowed them to develop into highly sophisticated organizations that blur the lines between criminality and legitimate business. This comprehensive examination explores the dark heart of Japanese organized crime through detailed analysis of significant murder cases, territorial wars, and the systematic violence that has characterized Yakuza operations for centuries. From the blood-soaked streets of post-war Japan to the corporate boardrooms of modern Tokyo, this is the story of how honor and brutality became inextricably intertwined in Japan's criminal underworld. The Yakuza's influence extends far beyond simple criminality. They have shaped Japanese politics, economics, and culture in ways that continue to reverberate today. Their story is one of adaptation and survival, of maintaining ancient traditions while embracing modern criminal enterprises, and of wielding violence as both a tool of control and a form of ritualistic expression. The roots of the Yakuza stretch back to the Edo period, 1603 to 1868, emerging from two distinct groups of social outcasts, the takiya, peddlers, and the bakuto, gamblers. These groups operated on the margins of Japanese society, providing services that were both necessary and officially forbidden. The takiya controlled street markets and festivals, while the bakuto ran gambling operations and dice games. The early proto-Yakuza groups were born from Japan's rigid social hierarchy, which created a class of people who existed outside the formal structure of society. The Tokugawa shogunate's strict class system relegated merchants, entertainers, and other service providers to the lowest social ranks, creating communities of outcasts who developed their own codes and structures for survival. The legendary figure of Shimizu no Jirocho, 1820 to 1893, represents one of the foundational myths of Yakuza culture. A bakuto boss who controlled gambling territories along the Takedo Road, Jirocho embodied the romantic ideal of the noble outlaw who protected the weak and maintained order through violence. His story, heavily mythologized over time, established many of the behavioral codes and ritualistic elements that continue to define Yakuza culture. The concept of Ninkyodo, the way of chivalry, emerged during this period as the philosophical foundation of Yakuza identity. This code emphasized loyalty, honor, and the protection of the weak, principles that stood in stark contrast to the actual criminal activities these groups engaged in. The tension between this idealized self-image and the reality of their criminal behavior remains a defining characteristic of Yakuza culture. The Meiji Restoration of 1868 dramatically altered Japanese society and created new opportunities for organized crime. The rapid modernization and urbanization of Japan disrupted traditional social structures and created chaos that criminal organizations were quick to exploit. The Yakuza evolved from feudal-era outcasts into modern criminal enterprises during this period of social upheaval. Violence was integral to Yakuza operations from their earliest origins. Territorial disputes between rival groups were settled through bloody conflicts that could last for years. These early gang wars established patterns of violence and retribution that would characterize Yakuza behavior for centuries. The ritualistic aspects of Yakuza violence, including specific methods of killing and body disposal, were developed during this foundational period. By the early 20th century, the Yakuza had evolved into highly sophisticated criminal organizations with complex hierarchical structures modeled after traditional Japanese family systems. The largest and most powerful groups developed into what criminologists call super syndicates, massive organizations with thousands of members operating across multiple prefectures and even internationally. The Yamaguchi-gumi, founded in 1915 in Kobe, emerged as the largest and most powerful Yakuza syndicate. At its peak, the organization boasted over 55,000 members and controlled criminal activities across much of Japan. The group structure resembled a massive corporation, with a central leadership, known as the Honbu, directing the activities of hundreds of subsidiary groups and thousands of individual operators. The hierarchical structure of Yakuza organizations is both rigid and familial. At the top sits the Kumicho, supreme boss, who functions as the father figure for the entire organization. Below him are various levels of leadership, including koban, children/subordinates, and kyodai, brothers, each with specific roles and responsibilities. This family-like structure creates powerful bonds of loyalty and obligation that are difficult to break. Initiation into Yakuza organizations involves elaborate ceremonies that emphasize the sacred nature of the commitment being made. New members participate in sake-sharing rituals that symbolically create family bonds, and they pledge absolute loyalty to their superiors and the organization. Breaking these oaths is considered one of the most serious violations in Yakuza culture and often results in severe punishment or death. The economic activities of modern Yakuza groups are diverse and sophisticated. While traditional criminal enterprises like gambling, prostitution, and protection rackets remain important, the groups have also moved into legitimate businesses including construction, real estate, finance, and entertainment. This diversification has made them incredibly wealthy and influential while making their criminal activities more difficult to detect and prosecute. Territory remains crucial to Yakuza operations, with different groups controlling specific geographic areas or business sectors. These territorial arrangements are generally respected, but violations can lead to violent conflicts. The boundaries between territories are often invisible to outsiders but are clearly understood within the criminal underworld. The aftermath of World War II created unprecedented opportunities for Yakuza expansion and influence. Japan's devastated economy, weakened government institutions, and massive social disruption provided ideal conditions for organized crime to flourish. The Yakuza emerged from the war stronger and more influential than ever before. During the immediate post-war period, the Yakuza provided services that the legitimate government and economy could not deliver. They organized black markets for scarce goods, provided security in lawless areas, and even assisted with reconstruction efforts. This semi-legitimate role gave them a degree of social acceptance that would persist for decades. The Korean War, 1950 to 1953, provided enormous opportunities for Yakuza groups to profit from supplying the American military presence in Japan. They controlled much of the entertainment and vice industries that served American servicemen, generating massive profits that they reinvested in expanding their operations and influence. The 1950s and 1960s saw a series of violent conflicts between rival Yakuza groups as they competed for control of Japan's rapidly growing economy. These gang wars were characterized by extreme violence and sophisticated tactical planning that resembled military operations more than traditional criminal conflicts. One of the most significant conflicts of this period was the Yamaichi War, 1985 to 1989. Which pitted the Yamaguchi-gumi against the Ichiwakai in a bloody struggle for control of the Kansai region. This conflict involved hundreds of violent incidents, including bombings, shootings, and assassinations that claimed dozens of lives and terrorized the civilian population. The violence of the Yamaichi War marked a turning point in public tolerance for Yakuza activities. The use of automatic weapons, explosives, and indiscriminate violence shocked the Japanese public that had previously tolerated organized crime as a necessary evil. This shift in public opinion would eventually lead to increased law enforcement pressure and legal reforms targeting organized crime. The Yakuza have developed distinctive methods of violence and murder that reflect both their cultural traditions and their practical needs as criminal organizations. These methods are characterized by their ritualistic elements, their symbolic meanings, and their effectiveness in sending messages to rivals and maintaining discipline within their own ranks. One of the most infamous Yakuza assassination techniques is the use of samurai swords, katana, in ritual killings. These weapons, which carry deep cultural significance in Japanese society, are employed not just for their lethality but for their symbolic value. The use of traditional weapons in modern murders represents the Yakuza's connection to Japan's feudal past and their self-perception as inheritors of samurai traditions. The most notorious example of Yakuza sword violence occurred in 1978 when Yamaguchi-gumi boss Kazuo Tauka was attacked with a samurai sword during a meeting in Kyoto. While Tauka survived the initial attack, he died several years later from complications related to his injuries. The assassination attempt marked the beginning of a violent succession struggle that would claim dozens of lives. Yakuza groups have also perfected the art of the precision shooting, often employing skilled marksmen who can eliminate targets with single, well-placed shots. These assassinations are typically carried out in public places as a way of demonstrating the organization's reach and power. The assassins often make no attempt to conceal their identities, instead treating the killings as public statements of intent. The 1992 assassination of Hiroyuki Nagata, a prominent businessman with alleged Yakuza connections, exemplified this approach. Nagata was shot dead outside a Tokyo restaurant by two gunmen who made no attempt to flee the scene. The killers were quickly apprehended, but their willingness to sacrifice themselves for the organization sent a powerful message about Yakuza dedication and discipline. Yakuza murders often involve elaborate ritual elements that serve both practical and symbolic purposes. Bodies may be disposed of in specific ways that send messages to rivals, or crime scenes may be arranged to convey particular meanings within the criminal underworld. These ritualistic aspects reflect the deep cultural traditions that continue to influence Yakuza behavior. The practice of yubitsume, finger cutting, represents one of the most distinctive Yakuza traditions related to violence and atonement. Members who violate organizational rules or fail in their duties may be required to cut off joints of their fingers as a form of apology and punishment. While not usually fatal, this practice demonstrates the Yakuza's willingness to inflict violence on their own members as a form of discipline and loyalty testing. One of the most shocking examples of Yakuza violence in modern Japanese history was the Itaidashin incident of 1984, which demonstrated the group's willingness to use extreme violence and their sophisticated organizational capabilities. This case involved the Yamaguchi-gumi systematic campaign against rival organizations and represented a new level of brutality in Japanese organized crime. The incident began with a dispute over territory and business interests between the Yamaguchi-gumi and several smaller rival groups. What started as a relatively minor conflict escalated into a full-scale war when the Yamaguchi-gumi leadership decided to make an example of their rivals through overwhelming violence. The campaign involved coordinated attacks across multiple cities, with Yamaguchi-gumi operatives targeting not just rival gang members but also their families and legitimate businesses. The attacks were characterized by their precision and their psychological impact, designed to terrorize rivals into submission rather than simply eliminate them. One of the most brutal incidents occurred in Osaka, where a team of Yamaguchi-gumi assassins attacked a rival group's headquarters with automatic weapons and explosives. The attack left 7 people dead and dozens wounded, including several civilians who happened to be in the area. The indiscriminate nature of the violence shocked the Japanese public and marked a departure from traditional Yakuza codes that supposedly protected innocent bystanders. The investigation into the Taidashin incident revealed the sophisticated planning and resources that modern Yakuza groups could bring to bear in violent conflicts. Police discovered detailed intelligence files on rival groups, military-grade weapons and explosives, and evidence of coordination between Yakuza cells across multiple prefectures. The case also highlighted the international connections of Japanese organized crime. Investigators found evidence that weapons used in the attacks had been smuggled from other countries, and that the Yamaguchi-gumi had received assistance from criminal organizations in Korea and the Philippines. This international cooperation demonstrated the global reach of organized crime networks. The aftermath of the Taidashin incident led to a major law enforcement crackdown on Yakuza activities. Hundreds of arrests were made, and the Japanese government began implementing new laws specifically designed to combat organized crime. The incident marked the beginning of a new, more aggressive phase in the government's approach to dealing with the Yakuza. The 1997 death of filmmaker Juzo Itami represents one of the most controversial and politically significant cases involving suspected Yakuza violence. Itami, who had directed satirical films about organized crime, was found dead after falling from his apartment balcony in what was officially ruled a suicide. However, the circumstances surrounding his death raised serious questions about Yakuza involvement and the limits of free expression in Japan. Itami had achieved international recognition for his films Tampopo and A Taxing Woman, but it was his 1992 film Minbo no Ana, The Gangster's Mall, that allegedly put him in danger. The film was a satirical comedy that mocked Yakuza pretensions and portrayed organized crime members as bumbling incompetents rather than the noble outlaws of their own mythology. The Yakuza response to Minbo no Ana was swift and violent. Shortly after the film's release, 5 members of the Gotogumi, a Yakuza group, attacked Itami outside his home, slashing his face and neck with knives. The attackers warned him against making any more films about organized crime, but Itami refused to be intimidated and continued his work. Following the attack, Itami began working on another film that would have examined Yakuza involvement in the entertainment industry. He had reportedly gathered significant information about organized crime's influence in Japanese cinema and was preparing to expose corrupt practices and criminal connections within the industry. On December 20, 1997, Itami was found dead on the pavement outside his apartment building. Police discovered a suicide note in his apartment, leading them to conclude that he had taken his own life. However, many observers found the suicide explanation unconvincing, particularly given the timing and Itami's ongoing conflicts with organized crime. The investigation into Itami's death was complicated by the difficulty of proving Yakuza involvement in what appeared to be a suicide. Japanese police have historically been reluctant to aggressively investigate cases involving organized crime, particularly when the evidence is circumstantial. The official conclusion of suicide was accepted despite significant public skepticism. The Itami case highlighted the Yakuza's influence over Japanese media and entertainment industries. The filmmaker's death sent a chilling message to other artists and journalists who might consider exposing organized crime activities. The case demonstrated how the threat of violence could be used to maintain a culture of silence around Yakuza activities. International observers and press freedom organizations pointed to the Itami case as evidence of the limitations on free expression in Japan. The case became a symbol of how organized crime could effectively censor artistic and journalistic work through intimidation and violence. The 1994 Pachinko Palace murders in Nagoya represented one of the most brazen and violent Yakuza crimes of the modern era. The case involved the systematic execution of rival gang members in a dispute over control of Japan's enormously profitable pachinko gambling industry. The murders shocked the Japanese public with their calculated brutality and demonstrated the Yakuza's willingness to use extreme violence to protect their business interests. Pachinko parlors represent one of the most important sources of revenue for Yakuza organizations. These gambling establishments, which operate in a legal gray area, generate billions of dollars in revenue annually and require complex relationships with legitimate businesses, government officials, and financial institutions. Control of pachinko operations has been a source of conflict between Yakuza groups for decades. The conflict that led to the Pachinko Palace murders began when the Yamaguchi-gumi attempted to expand their influence into Nagoya, which was traditionally controlled by smaller local groups. The local bosses initially resisted this encroachment, leading to a series of escalating conflicts over territory and revenue sharing. The murders occurred on a busy Saturday afternoon when 2 carloads of Yamaguchi-gumi operatives arrived at a pachinko parlor known to be controlled by their rivals. The attackers, armed with pistols and automatic weapons, entered the establishment and systematically executed 6 people, including several rival gang members and innocent customers who witnessed the attack. The killers made no attempt to conceal their identities or escape quietly. Instead, they calmly walked through the parlor, methodically shooting their targets before departing in their vehicles. The brazen nature of the attack, carried out in broad daylight in a crowded commercial area, was designed to send a message about the Yamaguchi-gumi's power and determination. The investigation into the Pachinko Palace murders was one of the largest in Japanese law enforcement history. Police deployed hundreds of officers and utilized extensive surveillance and intelligence-gathering operations to identify and apprehend the perpetrators. The investigation revealed the sophisticated planning and coordination involved in the attack. The case also exposed the complex financial networks that connected pachinko operations to both legitimate businesses and criminal organizations. Investigators discovered that the targeted parlor was connected to a web of companies and individuals that included politicians, business leaders, and organized crime figures. The trials that followed the Pachinko Palace murders resulted in multiple convictions and lengthy prison sentences for the perpetrators. However, the case also highlighted the challenges faced by Japanese prosecutors in building cases against organized crime figures, particularly when dealing with the code of silence that governs Yakuza behavior. The Tozai-kai War of the early 1980s represents one of the most extensive and bloody conflicts in modern Yakuza history. This multi-year conflict involved thousands of participants and resulted in hundreds of casualties, demonstrating the Yakuza's capacity for sustained, organized violence on a scale that resembled conventional warfare more than traditional criminal activity. The war began as a succession dispute within the Yamaguchi-gumi following the death of their longtime leader Kazuo Tauka in 1981. Tauka had ruled the organization with an iron fist for over 30 years, and his death created a power vacuum that various factions sought to fill. The conflict eventually expanded beyond the Yamaguchi-gumi to involve dozens of other criminal organizations across Japan. The primary antagonists in the conflict were the mainstream Yamaguchi-gumi faction and a breakaway group that formed the Ichiwakai. The split was initially about leadership succession, but it quickly became a broader conflict over territory, business interests, and the future direction of Japanese organized crime. The violence that characterized the Tozai-kai War was unprecedented in its scale and intensity. Over the course of several years, there were hundreds of shootings, bombings, and assassinations as the rival factions battled for supremacy. The conflict involved the use of military-grade weapons, including automatic rifles, hand grenades, and explosives that had been smuggled from other countries. One of the most shocking incidents of the war occurred in 1985 when Ichiwakai operatives used a rocket launcher to attack a Yamaguchi-gumi office in Osaka. The attack, which occurred in a busy commercial district, demonstrated the group's willingness to use extreme violence regardless of the risk to civilian bystanders. The incident marked a new level of escalation in organized crime violence. The systematic nature of the violence during the Tozai-kai War revealed the sophisticated intelligence and operational capabilities of modern Yakuza organizations. Both sides employed extensive surveillance networks, maintained detailed intelligence files on their enemies, and coordinated complex multi-target operations across vast geographic areas. The human cost of the war was enormous. Official statistics recorded over 200 deaths and thousands of injuries during the conflict, though the actual numbers were likely higher due to unreported incidents and the difficulty of distinguishing war-related violence from other criminal activities. The violence also claimed innocent bystanders and terrorized entire communities. The 1981 assassination of Yamaguchi-gumi boss Kazuo Tauka's potential successor, Noboru Yamaguchi, represents one of the most significant and complex murder cases in Yakuza history. The killing not only eliminated a key figure in Japanese organized crime but also triggered the succession crisis that would lead to years of violent conflict. Noboru Yamaguchi was widely considered Tauka's heir apparent and had been groomed for leadership of the Yamaguchi-gumi for several years. He was known for his intelligence, strategic thinking, and ability to navigate both the criminal underworld and legitimate business circles. His assassination removed a moderating influence from the organization and paved the way for more violent leadership. The murder occurred on July 23, 1981, when Yamaguchi was ambushed outside a restaurant in Osaka by gunmen from a rival faction. The attackers used multiple vehicles and automatic weapons in a coordinated assault that left Yamaguchi and two of his bodyguards dead. The precision and planning of the attack suggested extensive preparation and inside knowledge of Yamaguchi's movements. The investigation into Yamaguchi's murder revealed the complex internal politics of the Yamaguchi-gumi and the various factions that were competing for control following Tauka's death. Police discovered that the assassination had been planned by rivals within the organization who saw Yamaguchi as an obstacle to their own ambitions for power. The case demonstrated the sophisticated intelligence networks that Yakuza groups maintain within their own organizations. The assassins had detailed knowledge of Yamaguchi's schedule, security arrangements, and personal habits, suggesting that they had been gathering intelligence for an extended period before the attack. The murder weapons used in the Yamaguchi assassination were later traced to international arms trafficking networks, revealing the global connections of Japanese organized crime. The guns had been smuggled from the Philippines through networks controlled by Yakuza-affiliated groups, demonstrating the international scope of their criminal activities. The aftermath of Yamaguchi's murder saw a dramatic escalation in violence as various factions within the Yamaguchi-gumi began targeting each other in a series of revenge killings. The cycle of violence that followed his death would continue for years and claim dozens of additional lives. One of the most disturbing chapters in Yakuza criminal history involves their connections to the Aum Shinrikyo cult, which carried out the 1995 sarin gas attacks on the Tokyo subway system. While the cult was responsible for the actual terrorist attacks, investigations revealed significant connections between Aum Shinrikyo and various Yakuza groups that had provided services and support to the cult. The relationship between the Yakuza and Aum Shinrikyo began in the early 1990s when the cult was seeking to acquire weapons and other resources for their planned attacks. Several Yakuza groups, motivated primarily by profit rather than ideology, provided the cult with access to weapons, chemicals, and other materials that were later used in terrorist activities. The most significant Yakuza figure connected to Aum Shinrikyo was Yoshiaki Yamazaki, a weapons dealer with ties to the Yamaguchi-gumi. Yamazaki sold the cult military equipment and helped them acquire precursor chemicals for producing sarin gas. His activities demonstrated how organized crime's pursuit of profit could enable even terrorist activities. The investigation into the Aum Shinrikyo attacks revealed that Yakuza groups had also provided the cult with real estate for their facilities and had helped them launder money through various legitimate businesses. These services were crucial to the cult's ability to develop and deploy their chemical weapons capability. Following the discovery of these connections, several Yakuza figures were arrested and prosecuted for their roles in enabling the terrorist attacks. The cases highlighted the dangerous potential for organized crime groups to facilitate even more serious criminal activities when motivated by financial gain. The Aum Shinrikyo connection damaged the Yakuza's public image and contributed to increased government pressure on organized crime groups. The revelation that criminal organizations had enabled terrorist attacks shocked the Japanese public and undermined any remaining sympathy for Yakuza claims to be following honorable traditions. The case also revealed the international dimensions of Yakuza activities, as investigators discovered that the weapons and chemicals provided to Aum Shinrikyo had been acquired through international trafficking networks. This demonstrated the global reach of Japanese organized crime and their willingness to engage in the most serious forms of criminal activity. The Gotogumi, one of the most powerful Yakuza groups of the late 20th century, became notorious for their connections to the entertainment industry and their involvement in several high-profile murders that shocked Japanese society. Led by Tadamasa Goto, the organization demonstrated how modern Yakuza groups could exploit their connections to legitimate businesses and celebrities to expand their influence and wealth. Tadamasa Goto was one of the most powerful and feared Yakuza bosses of his era. Known for his intelligence, ruthlessness, and business acumen, Goto built his organization into a massive criminal enterprise with interests in construction, real estate, entertainment, and various illegal activities. His group's influence extended into the highest levels of Japanese society, including politics and business. The Gotogumi's entertainment industry connections were extensive and profitable. The group controlled several talent agencies, entertainment venues, and production companies, giving them significant influence over Japanese popular culture. They used this influence to launder money, recruit victims for various criminal activities, and maintain relationships with politicians and business leaders. One of the most notorious cases involving the Gotogumi was the 1992 murder of a popular television personality who had allegedly refused to cooperate with their entertainment industry operations. The victim, whose identity was protected by Japanese media, had reportedly threatened to expose Yakuza connections within the television industry. The murder was carried out with characteristic Yakuza precision and symbolism. The victim was found shot to death in their apartment, with the crime scene arranged to send specific messages to others in the entertainment industry. The killing effectively silenced other potential whistleblowers and demonstrated the group's reach into supposedly legitimate businesses. The investigation into the murder revealed the extensive surveillance and intelligence networks that the Gotogumi maintained within the entertainment industry. Police discovered that the group had detailed files on hundreds of celebrities, politicians, and business leaders, including information about their personal lives, financial situations, and potential vulnerabilities. The case also exposed the complex financial relationships between Yakuza groups and legitimate entertainment companies. Investigators found evidence of money laundering, extortion, and other financial crimes that involved major corporations and prominent individuals. These discoveries led to a broader investigation of organized crime influence in Japanese business. As Japan became increasingly integrated into the global economy during the late 20th and early 21st centuries, Yakuza organizations expanded their operations internationally, bringing their distinctive methods of violence and control to new territories. This expansion created new opportunities for profit but also exposed Japanese organized crime to increased scrutiny from international law enforcement agencies. The Yakuza's international expansion began in earnest during the 1980s economic boom when Japanese businesses were investing heavily overseas. Criminal organizations followed these legitimate investments, establishing operations in countries including the United States, Australia, Brazil, and throughout Southeast Asia. In the United States, Yakuza groups established significant operations in Hawaii and California, often working in partnership with other organized crime groups. These operations involved traditional criminal activities like gambling and prostitution, but also more sophisticated schemes involving real estate fraud, money laundering, and legitimate business investments. The 1993 murder of Japanese businessman Takeshi Matsuda in Los Angeles exemplified the international reach of Yakuza violence. Matsuda, who had been involved in a dispute with Yakuza-connected individuals over a real estate deal, was found shot to death in his Beverly Hills home. The investigation revealed connections to several Japanese organized crime figures and highlighted the group's willingness to use violence in foreign jurisdictions. Yakuza groups also established significant operations in Southeast Asia, particularly in the Philippines and Thailand. These operations often involved sex trafficking, drug smuggling, and arms dealing, taking advantage of weaker law enforcement and corrupt government officials in these countries. The international expansion of Yakuza activities brought increased attention from law enforcement agencies around the world. The FBI, DEA, and other U.S. agencies began dedicating significant resources to investigating Japanese organized crime, while similar efforts were undertaken by law enforcement in other countries. The globalization of Yakuza activities also led to increased cooperation between Japanese police and international law enforcement agencies. Joint investigations and intelligence sharing became more common as authorities recognized the need for coordinated responses to transnational organized crime. The Japanese government's response to escalating Yakuza violence culminated in the passage of the Anti-Boryokuden Act in 1991, which marked a fundamental shift in how the state dealt with organized crime. This legislation and subsequent reforms represented the most serious challenge to Yakuza power in their modern history. The Anti-Boryokuden Act designated specific criminal organizations as violent groups, Boryokuden, and made it illegal for citizens and businesses to provide them with certain types of support or services. The law also gave police new powers to investigate and prosecute organized crime activities and established harsher penalties for Yakuza-related crimes. One of the most significant aspects of the new legislation was its impact on the legitimate businesses that had historically worked with Yakuza groups. Construction companies, financial institutions, and other businesses were now legally prohibited from paying protection money or otherwise supporting designated criminal organizations. The implementation of the Anti-Boryokuden Act led to a significant increase in arrests and prosecutions of Yakuza members. Police began conducting large-scale raids on Yakuza offices and properties, seizing weapons, documents, and other evidence of criminal activities. These operations demonstrated the government's new commitment to aggressively combating organized crime. The law also targeted the financial operations of Yakuza groups, requiring banks and other financial institutions to report suspicious transactions and refuse services to known organized crime figures. This financial pressure significantly impacted the group's ability to operate and forced them to develop new methods for managing their money. The Yakuza response to increased government pressure was initially violent, with several attacks on police officers and government officials. However, over time, many groups adapted by reducing their public profile and moving their criminal activities underground. Some groups also attempted to legitimize their operations by divesting from clearly illegal activities. The effectiveness of the Anti-Boryokuden Act was demonstrated by significant reductions in Yakuza membership and influence over the following decades. While the groups continue to exist and operate, their power and social acceptance have been greatly diminished compared to their peak during the post-war period. The Kudokai, based in Kitakyushu, represents one of the most violent and uncompromising Yakuza groups of the modern era. Unlike larger organizations that have attempted to moderate their public image and reduce overt violence, the Kudokai has maintained an openly confrontational stance toward law enforcement and rival groups. The organization, led for decades by Satoru Nomura, became notorious for its willingness to target police officers, prosecutors, and other government officials, a violation of traditional Yakuza codes that had generally prohibited attacks on law enforcement. This aggressive stance made the Kudokai one of the most feared and hated organized crime groups in Japan. One of the most shocking incidents involving the Kudo-kai was the 1998 shooting of a police officer in Kitakyushu. The attack, which was carried out in retaliation for increased law enforcement pressure on the group, marked a dangerous escalation in the conflict between organized crime and the state. The shooting sent shockwaves through Japanese law enforcement and led to massive manhunts for the perpetrators. The Kudo-kai's violence was not limited to conflicts with law enforcement. The group engaged in brutal wars with rival organizations that resulted in dozens of deaths and created terror in the communities where they operated. Their methods were characterized by exceptional brutality and a willingness to target family members and associates of their enemies. The 2012 murder of a former Kudo-kai member who had cooperated with police demonstrated the group's ruthless approach to maintaining discipline and silence. The victim had provided information to authorities about the group's activities and was killed in a manner designed to send a message to other potential informants. The investigation into Kudo-kai activities revealed an organization that operated more like a terrorist group than a traditional criminal organization. Police discovered weapons caches, bomb-making materials, and detailed intelligence files on law enforcement personnel and their families. The Japanese government designated the Kudo-kai as a extremely dangerous designated organized crime group, subjecting them to enhanced surveillance and legal restrictions. This designation reflected the unprecedented threat that the group posed to public safety and law enforcement. While violence remains central to Yakuza operations, modern organized crime groups in Japan have become increasingly sophisticated in their financial crimes and connections to legitimate businesses. These activities generate enormous profits while being more difficult to detect and prosecute than traditional violent crimes. The Yakuza's involvement in legitimate businesses often begins through loans to struggling companies or individuals who cannot obtain financing through conventional means. These loans typically come with extremely high interest rates and requirements for ongoing cooperation with Yakuza activities. Companies that cannot repay become effectively controlled by organized crime groups. The construction industry has been particularly susceptible to Yakuza influence, with criminal organizations controlling significant portions of public works projects through a combination of legitimate business operations and criminal intimidation. This influence has allowed them to skim billions of dollars from government contracts while also providing opportunities for money laundering. Real estate speculation has been another major source of Yakuza profits, particularly during Japan's economic bubble of the 1980s. Criminal organizations used intimidation, fraud, and violence to manipulate property values and force sales, generating enormous profits while distorting legitimate markets. The 1991 murder of real estate developer Juzan Wada illustrated the violent methods that Yakuza groups would employ to protect their financial interests. Wada had been involved in a dispute with the Sumiyoshi Kai over a lucrative development project in Tokyo. When negotiations failed, Wada was found shot to death in his office, and the project ultimately came under Yakuza control. Financial investigations into Yakuza activities have revealed complex networks of shell companies, offshore accounts, and legitimate businesses that are used to launder money and conceal criminal profits. These networks often involve professional services from lawyers, accountants, and financial advisors who may or may not be aware of their clients' criminal connections. The integration of Yakuza groups into legitimate business has made them incredibly wealthy and influential, but it has also created vulnerabilities that law enforcement has learned to exploit. Financial investigations can reveal criminal activities that might otherwise remain hidden and provide evidence for prosecutions. One of the most disturbing aspects of modern Yakuza operations involves their systematic exploitation of vulnerable women through human trafficking and forced prostitution. These activities generate enormous profits for organized crime groups while causing immeasurable harm to their victims, many of whom are foreign nationals who are particularly vulnerable to exploitation. The Yakuza's involvement in human trafficking typically involves the recruitment of women from economically disadvantaged countries in Southeast Asia, Eastern Europe, and South America. These women are often promised legitimate employment in Japan's entertainment or service industries, only to find themselves trapped in situations of forced prostitution and sexual slavery. The recruitment process is sophisticated and deceptive, often involving legitimate-seeming employment agencies and cultural exchange programs that mask their true purpose. Women are provided with fraudulent documentation and promised high-paying jobs in restaurants, hotels, or entertainment venues. Once they arrive in Japan, however, their documents are confiscated and they are forced into prostitution to pay off fabricated debts. The case of Maria Santos, a pseudonym used to protect the victim's identity, illustrates the typical pattern of Yakuza human trafficking operations. Santos, a 19-year-old woman from the Philippines, was recruited through an agency that promised her work as a restaurant hostess in Tokyo. Upon arrival, she was taken to a Yakuza-controlled establishment where she was informed that she owed $50,000 for transportation and housing costs and would have to work as a prostitute to pay off this debt. Santos was held captive for over 2 years in a series of brothels controlled by the Sumiyoshi Kai. She was subjected to regular sexual assault, physical violence, and psychological abuse designed to break her spirit and prevent escape attempts. Her passport and identification documents were held by her captors, making it impossible for her to prove her identity or legal status if she did manage to escape. The murder of Santos in 1999 occurred when she attempted to contact Philippine embassy officials for help. Her Yakuza captors discovered her plans and killed her as an example to other trafficked women. Her body was found in Tokyo Bay several weeks later, bearing signs of torture and execution-style wounds that were characteristic of Yakuza violence. The investigation into Santos' murder revealed the extensive networks that Yakuza groups use to facilitate human trafficking. Police discovered connections between Japanese organized crime groups and criminal organizations in multiple countries, suggesting a sophisticated international conspiracy to exploit vulnerable women. The case also highlighted the challenges faced by foreign victims of Yakuza crimes. Language barriers, fear of deportation, and unfamiliarity with Japanese legal systems made it extremely difficult for trafficked women to seek help or cooperate with law enforcement investigations. The 2003 Kudzu massacre stands as one of the most brutal examples of Yakuza territorial violence in recent history. This incident involved the systematic execution of members of a small Osaka-based gang by operatives from the Yamaguchi-gumi, demonstrating the ruthless methods employed by major Yakuza groups to eliminate competition and consolidate control. The conflict began when the Kudzu-gumi, a small independent group, refused to acknowledge Yamaguchi-gumi authority over certain gambling and entertainment operations in their neighborhood. The smaller group's defiance was seen as an intolerable challenge to Yamaguchi-gumi authority and required a violent response to maintain organizational prestige. The massacre was planned with military precision, involving extensive surveillance of the target group's activities and the coordination of multiple attack teams. On the night of March 15, 2003, Yamaguchi-gumi operatives simultaneously struck multiple locations associated with the Kudzu-gumi, including their headquarters, several members' homes, and a Pachizuro parlor they controlled. The attackers used automatic weapons and explosives to overwhelm their targets, leaving no survivors among the primary Kudzu-gumi leadership. A total of 11 people were killed in the coordinated attacks, including several family members who were not directly involved in criminal activities. The indiscriminate nature of the violence marked a departure from traditional Yakuza codes that supposedly protected noncombatants. The crime scenes revealed the calculated brutality of the attacks. Victims had been shot multiple times at close range, and several showed signs of torture before being killed. The attackers had also mutilated some bodies in ways that carried specific meanings within Yakuza culture, sending messages about the consequences of defying major criminal organizations. The investigation into the Kudzu massacre was one of the most extensive in Japanese law enforcement history. Police deployed hundreds of officers and utilized advanced forensic techniques to identify the perpetrators and build cases against them. The investigation revealed the sophisticated planning and coordination involved in the attacks. The case also demonstrated the international aspects of modern Yakuza operations. Some of the weapons used in the massacre were traced to overseas sources, and investigators discovered that the Yamaguchi-gumi had received intelligence support from affiliated groups in other countries. The trials that followed the Kudzu massacre resulted in multiple death sentences and lengthy prison terms for the perpetrators. However, the case also highlighted the difficulties faced by prosecutors in penetrating the code of silence that protects Yakuza organizations from law enforcement investigations. As technology has revolutionized global commerce and communication, Yakuza groups have adapted their criminal methods to exploit new opportunities in cyberspace. Modern Japanese organized crime increasingly involves sophisticated computer crimes, online fraud, and digital money laundering that generate enormous profits while being difficult to detect and prosecute. The transition to cybercrime began in the 1990s as personal computers and internet connectivity became widespread in Japan. Yakuza groups quickly recognized the potential for using technology to expand their traditional criminal activities and develop entirely new forms of illegal enterprise. One of the most significant cybercrime operations involved the Yamaguchi-gumi's development of sophisticated online gambling platforms that circumvented Japanese laws prohibiting most forms of gambling. These platforms generated hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue while being technically hosted in countries where online gambling was legal. The murder of programmer Takeshi Nakamura in 2001 revealed the violent enforcement methods that Yakuza groups employ even in their cybercrime operations. Nakamura had been hired to develop gambling software for a Yakuza-controlled operation but attempted to expose the illegal nature of the scheme when he realized what he was involved in. He was found shot to death in his apartment, with his computers and hard drives destroyed to eliminate evidence. Yakuza cyber operations have also involved massive identity theft and financial fraud schemes targeting both Japanese and international victims. These operations use sophisticated phishing techniques, malware, and social engineering to steal personal and financial information that can be used for fraudulent purposes. The investigation into these cyber crimes has required Japanese law enforcement to develop new capabilities and expertise in digital forensics and international cooperation. The global nature of internet-based crimes means that investigations often involve multiple countries and require complex legal coordination. The adaptation to cybercrime has also changed the profile of Yakuza membership, with groups increasingly recruiting individuals with technical skills rather than just those willing to engage in physical violence. This evolution has made the organizations more sophisticated but also more difficult to infiltrate and investigate. The early 21st century has seen significant changes in Yakuza power and influence, driven by increased government pressure, changing social attitudes, and economic transformations that have reduced opportunities for traditional organized crime activities. While the groups continue to exist and operate, their influence has been significantly diminished compared to their peak during the post-war period. Government efforts to combat organized crime have been increasingly successful, with membership in designated Yakuza groups falling from over 180,000 in the 1960s to approximately 25,000 today. This dramatic reduction reflects both effective law enforcement pressure and changing social conditions that make Yakuza membership less attractive to potential recruits. The aging of Yakuza membership has become a significant issue for the organizations, with many groups struggling to recruit younger members who are attracted to legitimate opportunities in Japan's modern economy. The average age of Yakuza members has increased substantially, and some groups face the prospect of eventual extinction through attrition. Economic changes have also reduced opportunities for traditional Yakuza activities. Japan's economic stagnation since the 1990s has reduced demand for many of the services that organized crime groups traditionally provided, while increased regulation and law enforcement pressure have made their operations more difficult and less profitable. The 2011 murder of Yakuza boss Kenichi Shinoda's lieutenant marked one of the last major violent incidents involving traditional organized crime conflicts. The killing, which occurred during a succession dispute within the Yamaguchi-gumi, was notable for being one of the few recent cases to receive significant media attention, reflecting the reduced frequency of such incidents. Despite their declining influence, Yakuza groups continue to adapt and evolve, finding new opportunities in areas like cybercrime, international trafficking, and legitimate business investments. Their ability to adapt has been one of their most enduring characteristics and suggests that they will continue to exist in some form despite government pressure. The transformation of the Yakuza from powerful criminal organizations to marginalized groups reflects broader changes in Japanese society and the effectiveness of sustained law enforcement efforts. However, their history and influence continue to shape Japanese culture and society in ways that will persist for generations. The global reach of modern Yakuza operations has necessitated unprecedented levels of international law enforcement cooperation. The 2019 arrest of Yamaguchi-gumi associate Akira Igaki in the United States exemplified how international coordination can successfully target Japanese organized crime figures operating across borders. Igaki had been involved in a complex money laundering scheme that moved Yakuza profits through banks in multiple countries before investing them in legitimate businesses in the United States and Europe. The investigation into his activities involved cooperation between Japanese police, the FBI, Europol, and financial intelligence units from several countries. The case revealed the sophisticated methods that modern Yakuza groups use to move and conceal their criminal profits. Investigators discovered a network of shell companies, cryptocurrency transactions, and legitimate business investments that had been used to launder hundreds of millions of dollars in criminal proceeds. Igaki's arrest was coordinated with simultaneous raids in Japan, the United States, and several European countries, resulting in the seizure of assets worth over $500 million and the disruption of a major international money laundering network. The operation demonstrated the effectiveness of international cooperation in combating transnational organized crime. The investigation also revealed ongoing connections between Japanese organized crime groups and criminal organizations in other countries, including Italian-American crime families, Russian organized crime groups, and various Asian criminal networks. These connections facilitate various forms of criminal cooperation, including drug trafficking, weapons smuggling, and human trafficking. The success of international operations against Yakuza groups has led to increased cooperation and intelligence sharing between law enforcement agencies worldwide. Joint task forces and specialized units have been established to specifically target Japanese organized crime activities in multiple countries. These international efforts have significantly impacted Yakuza operations, forcing them to be more cautious in their overseas activities and making it more difficult for them to exploit differences between national legal systems. The increased scrutiny has also made it harder for Yakuza groups to establish legitimate business fronts in foreign countries. Understanding the psychological factors that drive Yakuza violence requires examining both individual motivations and the cultural and organizational structures that shape behavior within these criminal groups. The unique aspects of Japanese organized crime reflect broader cultural values and historical traditions that distinguish them from criminal organizations in other countries. The concept of giri, duty/obligation, plays a central role in Yakuza psychology and helps explain the extreme loyalty and willingness to engage in violence that characterizes these organizations. Members are taught that their obligations to the group and their superiors supersede all other considerations, including personal safety and legal consequences. The ritualistic aspects of Yakuza violence serve important psychological functions within the organizations. Elaborate ceremonies surrounding acts of violence help transform criminal behavior into sacred acts that reinforce group identity and individual commitment. This ritualization makes violence more psychologically acceptable to participants and observers. The famous practice of yubitsum, finger cutting, as a form of atonement represents one of the most distinctive psychological aspects of Yakuza culture. This self-mutilation serves multiple functions. It provides a visible sign of disgrace and commitment to atonement. It creates physical handicaps that make members more dependent on the organization, and it demonstrates the extreme measures that members will take to maintain their standing within the group. The case of Yakuza member Hiroshi Yamamoto, who killed himself in 1995 rather than betray his organization to police, illustrates the extreme psychological conditioning that these groups achieve. Yamamoto had been arrested for murder but chose suicide over cooperation with authorities, demonstrating the power of Yakuza psychological indoctrination. The relationship between honor and violence in Yakuza culture creates psychological frameworks that make extreme brutality seem not only acceptable but necessary. Members are taught that their personal honor and the honor of their organization depend on their willingness to use violence when required. The psychological impact of Yakuza violence extends beyond the organizations themselves to affect entire communities. The knowledge that organized crime groups are willing to use extreme violence creates atmospheres of fear and intimidation that can silence potential witnesses and victims even when they are not directly threatened. The human cost of Yakuza violence extends far beyond the immediate victims of their crimes to include families, communities, and society as a whole. Understanding the impact on victims and survivors provides crucial insights into the true nature of organized crime and the importance of law enforcement efforts to combat these groups. Families of Yakuza murder victims often face ongoing intimidation and harassment that can continue for years after the initial crime. The code of revenge that governs Yakuza behavior means that family members may be targeted for retaliation, forcing them to live in fear or relocate to escape potential violence. The case of the Tanaka family illustrates the broader impact of Yakuza violence on innocent civilians. After patriarch Kenji Tanaka was murdered in 1987 for refusing to pay protection money to a local Yakuza group, his family faced years of threats and intimidation. His widow was forced to sell the family business and relocate multiple times to escape harassment from the criminal organization. Survivors of Yakuza violence often struggle with long-term psychological trauma that affects their ability to work, maintain relationships, and participate normally in society. The ritualistic and symbolic aspects of Yakuza violence are often designed to create maximum psychological impact, leaving survivors with lasting mental health issues. The social stigma associated with Yakuza involvement also affects victims and their families. In Japanese society, any connection to organized crime, even as a victim, can result in social ostracism and discrimination. This stigma often prevents victims from seeking help or cooperating with law enforcement investigations. Support services for victims of organized crime in Japan have been limited, reflecting both the historical tolerance for Yakuza activities and the difficulty of providing assistance when the perpetrators remain powerful and dangerous. Recent years have seen improvements in victim support services, but significant gaps remain. The courage required for victims and witnesses to testify against Yakuza organizations cannot be overstated. The risk of retaliation, combined with social pressure and the group's reputation for violence, makes cooperation with law enforcement extremely difficult and dangerous. Japanese law enforcement agencies have faced unique challenges in combating Yakuza organizations due to their deep integration into Japanese society and their sophisticated operational methods. The semi-legitimate status that these groups enjoyed for decades made traditional policing approaches inadequate and required the development of specialized techniques and units. The Tokyo Metropolitan Police's Organized Crime Control Division, established in the 1970s, represents one of the most successful law enforcement adaptations to the Yakuza threat. This specialized unit developed expertise in financial investigations, electronic surveillance, and long-term intelligence operations that proved crucial in building cases against organized crime figures. One of the major breakthroughs in anti-Yakuza enforcement came with the development of financial investigation techniques that could trace money flows through the complex networks of legitimate and illegitimate businesses controlled by organized crime groups. These investigations revealed vulnerabilities in Yakuza operations that traditional violent crime investigations had missed. The successful prosecution of Yamaguchi-gumi boss Yoshinori Watanabe in 2005 demonstrated the effectiveness of these new approaches. Watanabe was convicted not for violent crimes but for tax evasion and financial irregularities, showing how white-collar crime techniques could be used to target organized crime leaders who had previously seemed untouchable. Electronic surveillance has become increasingly important in investigating Yakuza activities, though legal restrictions and the group's awareness of surveillance techniques make this challenging. The development of specialized technical capabilities has allowed law enforcement to gather evidence that would have been impossible to obtain through traditional methods. International cooperation has become crucial as Yakuza operations have expanded globally. Japanese police now work closely with law enforcement agencies worldwide to track Yakuza activities and coordinate investigations across multiple jurisdictions. The witness protection programs developed to handle Yakuza cases represent some of the most sophisticated in the world, reflecting the extreme dangers faced by those who testify against organized crime groups. These programs have been crucial in encouraging cooperation from victims and witnesses who might otherwise be too frightened to come forward. The Yakuza have had an enormous impact on Japanese popular culture, influencing everything from literature and film to video games and manga. This cultural influence has created a complex relationship between organized crime and mainstream society that has both romanticized criminal behavior and contributed to public awareness of Yakuza activities. Japanese cinema has produced hundreds of films about Yakuza life, ranging from sympathetic portrayals that emphasize honor and loyalty to critical examinations of the violence and corruption associated with organized crime. Directors like Kinji Fukasaku and Takashi Kitano have created influential works that have shaped both domestic and international perceptions of the Yakuza. The murder of film producer Noboru Tanaka in 1987 illustrated the dangerous intersection between Yakuza reality and media representation. Tanaka had been planning a film that would have exposed real criminal activities of specific Yakuza groups, leading to threats and ultimately his assassination. His death sent a chilling message to other filmmakers about the limits of artistic freedom when dealing with organized crime subjects. The manga and anime industries have also been significantly influenced by Yakuza themes, with numerous popular series featuring organized crime characters and storylines. These representations have contributed to the romanticization of Yakuza culture while also educating audiences about their methods and traditions. Video games have provided another medium for exploring Yakuza themes, with series like Yakuza, known as Ryu-Ga Gotoku in Japan, achieving international success while portraying relatively realistic aspects of organized crime life. These games have introduced global audiences to Yakuza culture while raising questions about the ethics of entertainment based on criminal activities. The cultural fascination with Yakuza has also influenced academic research and scholarship, with numerous studies examining their organizational structures, cultural traditions, and social impact. This research has contributed to better understanding of organized crime more generally and has informed law enforcement strategies. However, the romanticization of Yakuza culture in popular media has also had negative effects, potentially glorifying criminal behavior and making recruitment easier for actual organized crime groups. This has led to ongoing debates about the responsibility of media creators when dealing with criminal subjects. The economic impact of Yakuza activities on Japanese society has been enormous, with estimates suggesting that organized crime operations cost the Japanese economy tens of billions of dollars annually through various forms of criminal activity, corruption, and market distortion. Protection rackets operated by Yakuza groups impose significant costs on businesses, particularly small and medium-sized enterprises that cannot afford private security or resist organized crime pressure. These rackets function as illegal taxes that reduce business profitability and discourage entrepreneurship in affected areas. The Yakuza's involvement in legitimate businesses has distorted markets and created unfair competitive advantages for companies with organized crime connections. This corruption of legitimate business competition has broader economic effects that impact innovation, efficiency, and growth. The 1996 murder of whistleblower Akira Swamatsu highlighted the economic costs of Yakuza intimidation. Swamatsu, an accountant who had discovered evidence of organized crime money laundering through a major construction company, was killed before he could testify to authorities. His death not only eliminated a key witness but also sent a message that discouraged other potential whistleblowers. Financial crimes committed by Yakuza groups, including money laundering, securities fraud, and tax evasion, undermine the integrity of Japan's financial system and create additional costs for legitimate businesses and taxpayers. These crimes also facilitate other forms of criminal activity by providing cleaned money for reinvestment in illegal enterprises. The social costs of Yakuza violence include not only the direct harm to victims but also the broader climate of fear and intimidation that affects entire communities. Areas with significant Yakuza presence often experience reduced property values, decreased business investment, and social problems that persist long after specific criminal incidents. Healthcare costs associated with treating victims of Yakuza violence represent another significant economic impact. The brutal methods employed by these groups often result in severe injuries that require extensive medical treatment and long-term care. The resources required for law enforcement efforts to combat Yakuza activities represent a substantial public expense. Specialized police units, extended investigations, and protective services for witnesses and victims all require significant government investment. The globalization of criminal activities has led to increasingly complex relationships between Yakuza groups and organized crime organizations worldwide. These international connections have facilitated new forms of criminal enterprise while also creating vulnerabilities that law enforcement agencies have learned to exploit. The relationship between Japanese Yakuza and Italian-American organized crime families has been particularly significant, involving cooperation in drug trafficking, money laundering, and various forms of fraud. The 1989 murder of Yakuza mediator Susumu Ishii was partially attributed to conflicts over international drug trafficking arrangements with American crime families. Yakuza groups have also established significant relationships with Russian organized crime networks, particularly following the collapse of the Soviet Union. These relationships have facilitated arms trafficking, human trafficking, and various forms of financial crime that exploit differences between national legal systems. The murder of Russian businessman Viktor Petrov in Tokyo in 2000 revealed the violent dynamics of these international criminal relationships. Petrov had been involved in a dispute with Yakuza partners over profits from a joint money laundering operation, demonstrating how international criminal cooperation can also lead to international criminal conflicts. Southeast Asian criminal organizations have become increasingly important partners for Yakuza groups, particularly in drug trafficking and human trafficking operations. The geographic proximity and economic relationships between Japan and Southeast Asian countries provide natural opportunities for criminal cooperation. The investigation of these international connections has required the development of new law enforcement capabilities and international legal frameworks. Mutual legal assistance treaties, joint investigation teams, and international intelligence sharing have become crucial tools in combating transnational organized crime. The complexity of international organized crime relationships has also created new opportunities for law enforcement to penetrate criminal organizations through the cooperation of foreign partners who may be more vulnerable to pressure or more willing to cooperate with authorities. As Japan moves further into the 21st century, Yakuza organizations face unprecedented challenges from law enforcement pressure, changing social attitudes, and economic transformations that threaten their traditional sources of power and profit. However, their historical adaptability suggests that they will continue to evolve and find new ways to maintain their criminal enterprises. The COVID-19 pandemic created new challenges and opportunities for Yakuza operations. Government restrictions on businesses and social activities disrupted many traditional criminal enterprises, forcing organizations to adapt their methods and find new sources of revenue. Some groups reportedly became involved in pandemic-related fraud and illegal financial schemes. The rise of cryptocurrency and digital financial systems has provided new opportunities for money laundering and financial crime that Yakuza groups have been quick to exploit. The pseudonymous nature of many cryptocurrency transactions makes them particularly attractive for criminal organizations seeking to conceal the sources and destinations of their funds. The aging demographics of Japanese society have also affected Yakuza operations, both in terms of recruitment challenges and changing market opportunities. The groups have had to adapt their traditional methods to appeal to younger generations while also finding ways to exploit the vulnerabilities of an aging population. Ongoing territorial disputes continue to generate violence, though at much reduced levels compared to the conflicts of previous decades. The 2020 shooting of a Kudokai member in Fukuoka demonstrated that Yakuza groups remain willing to use violence to resolve disputes, even under increased law enforcement scrutiny. The future of Japanese organized crime will likely involve continued adaptation to new technologies, markets, and social conditions. While the traditional forms of Yakuza organization may continue to decline, the criminal enterprises they have developed will likely persist in new forms. The international dimensions of Yakuza activities are also likely to become increasingly important as Japan becomes more integrated into global economic and social networks. This internationalization creates both new opportunities for criminal activity and new vulnerabilities to law enforcement pressure. The story of the Yakuza represents one of the most complex and enduring examples of organized crime in world history. For over 4 centuries, these organizations have adapted to changing social, economic, and political conditions while maintaining their essential character as sophisticated criminal enterprises built on violence, loyalty, and the exploitation of social vulnerabilities. The murder cases and violent conflicts examined in this study reveal the true nature of organized crime, not the romanticized image of honorable outlaws promoted in popular culture, but the reality of brutal criminal organizations that cause immeasurable harm to individuals and society. The victims of Yakuza violence, from rival gang members to innocent civilians, represent the human cost of allowing organized crime to operate with impunity. The evolution of Yakuza from feudal-era outcasts to modern criminal corporations demonstrates both their adaptability and the persistent challenges they pose to legitimate society. Their ability to integrate into legitimate businesses and political systems while maintaining their criminal activities represents a unique form of organized crime that has few parallels elsewhere in the world. The success of recent law enforcement efforts against Yakuza organizations provides hope that even the most entrenched criminal groups can be challenged and weakened through sustained pressure and sophisticated investigative techniques. The dramatic reduction in Yakuza membership and influence over the past several decades shows that organized crime is not an inevitable feature of society. However, the persistence of Yakuza organizations despite decades of government pressure also demonstrates their resilience and adaptability. Their evolution into new forms of criminal enterprise, including cybercrime and international operations, suggests that they will continue to pose challenges for law enforcement and society. The international expansion of Yakuza activities has made them a global concern rather than merely a Japanese problem. Their involvement in international drug trafficking, human trafficking, and financial crimes affects countries worldwide and requires coordinated international responses. The study of Yakuza violence and criminal methods provides valuable insights into organized crime more generally. The sophisticated organizational structures, cultural traditions, and operational methods developed by these groups have influenced criminal organizations worldwide and continue to inform law enforcement strategies for combating organized crime. The legacy of Yakuza violence will continue to influence Japanese society for generations to come. The culture of fear and intimidation they created, the corruption they fostered in legitimate institutions, and the normalization of criminal behavior they achieved represent challenges that extend far beyond their immediate criminal activities. As Japan continues to modernize and integrate with the global community, the anachronistic nature of Yakuza organizations becomes increasingly apparent. Their feudal traditions and violent methods are increasingly incompatible with the values and requirements of a modern democratic society. The courage of victims, witnesses, and law enforcement officers who have confronted Yakuza violence deserves recognition and respect. Their willingness to stand up to these powerful criminal organizations has been crucial in reducing their influence and protecting Japanese society from their predatory behavior. The shadow that the Yakuza have cast over Japanese society for centuries may finally be beginning to fade, but their impact on the country's history, culture, and institutions will persist long after their criminal enterprises have been dismantled. Their story serves as both a cautionary tale about the dangers of organized crime and a testament to the possibility of overcoming even the most entrenched criminal organizations through sustained effort and commitment to justice. In the end, the story of Yakuza violence is ultimately a story about power, how it is acquired, maintained, and eventually lost. The rise and fall of these criminal empires demonstrates that no form of power, no matter how deeply entrenched or culturally accepted, is permanent when confronted with the determined pursuit of justice and the rule of law. This comprehensive study is based on court records, police investigations, academic research, and documented historical accounts of Japanese organized crime. It serves as an educational resource for understanding the evolution, methods, and impact of one of the world's most sophisticated and enduring criminal organizations.